willing to hear some controversial remarks, and I'm perfectly happy to have good questions afterwards. But I'll just give you a few of the headlines that we have seen in the United States about business education. These are just from the last couple of years. These first two are from the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is one of the leading newspapers in the United States dedicated to higher education. I just gave you the headlines to give you an idea. Business schools have no business in a university. Abolish the business major. You can't quite tell because of the line there, but it says anti-intellectual degree programs have no place in colleges. Anti-intellectual. Now note that that doesn't say not very highly intellectual. It says anti-intellectual. In other words, there is a view among some academics in higher education that business education is actually and I'll just give you one more. This was a book written recently, published by University Press. Nothing seems like failure. This is history. In business schools. Note the sad history. It's a sad history. Okay, so there are many people now. I would note that all of the people who wrote these articles are not business professors. They're in each case they're history professors. So it may be the case that they haven't spent much time in business schools actually learning about what gets taught. Nevertheless, this is a very strong view. It's a strong view that many people have in the United States. I suspect it's a view that you have, or that if not you yourself share, you will have heard people who have that view in Mexico as well. So what I would like to suggest. Oh, I'll give you one more. I realize you can't read this. That's okay. This is a summary of 7 different studies that were done conducting surveys about people's opinions about business. The highlighted portion says in their 7 surveys, came out just a couple of years ago, people see business profit as necessarily in conflict with the social good. I want you to think about that. Not that it's sometimes in conflict with the social good, or it could be in conflict, but it's necessarily in conflict. In other words, it's impossible. So a majority of people think it's impossible to engage in business in such a way that you're actually promoting the social good. So that's the view that we're going to contend, that we're going to examine, and that's the background for what we have. So when I say there's a moral purpose of business, there is already a question about that. How could there possibly be a moral purpose to business? And what I would like to suggest, when I first began teaching in a business school, my training is in philosophy. I had spent most of my career teaching philosophy. I got asked to teach a business ethics course, a course called Business Ethics in a business school. And one of the things that I was surprised to discover is how many business students, by the way, how many business students do we have in the room today? Do we have any business students? A couple, a few, okay, just a few. How many philosophy students? We have more philosophy than business, okay. Well, you can see whether this is true for you, those few of you who are business students. What I was surprised to discover is how many students who are studying business, so business students, are embarrassed by the fact that they study business. In other words, they don't want to tell people that they study business. They lie to their friends and say, oh, I'm studying psychology or maybe social science or something. But they're embarrassed about it, especially students who study finance. Students who study finance, they don't want anybody to know they're studying finance. Well, that strikes me as a very strange thing. Why would you study something and potentially dedicate your life to it if it's something you're embarrassed about? So I have asked many students, well, why are you studying business? And usually the answers that they give are just these 2. So the entire universe of possible answers to why you would ever want to study business are to get a job or to make money. Well, okay. Do you think that's true for business students, that they want to get a job or they want to make money? Probably. Is that true for every other student at the university too? Yeah. Maybe. Maybe. Still, if those are the only reasons you're doing something, it's not a particularly inspiring vision. At least I don't think so. It's not very inspiring. And in fact, I would give you as just friendly advice. If the only reason you're thinking about doing something, anything, is because you're getting paid to do it, you should think about that again. Money is, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with getting paid for doing something, but there really should be something, some other reason you're doing it, not just the money. So I'd like to ask you to consider these two professions and compare them for a second. Medicine and business. So both of them are professions. In both of them, there are specialties, there are subspecialties. In both of them, there is technical knowledge that you need to learn in order to succeed. In both of them, you might need many years of experience before you're successful. So in all of those ways, they're similar. And of course, there's yet one more way in which they're similar. Namely, if you do well and become successful, you might make a lot of money. So in all those ways, those two professions are similar, yet consider how differently the two professions are viewed by the wider culture. So no one says to the medical doctor or to the surgeon, well, now that you've made your money, you need to give back to society. But they say that to business people. If you make money, you need to give back. And have you heard that phrase before? It's very popular in the United States. People say that all the time. I assume you've heard versions of that, something like that here. Business people or firms, industries should give back to society. I would invite you for a moment to think about what that question means. Notice that it's not suggested that you should give, but that you should give back. Do you notice the difference between those two? Think about what it means to say you need to give something back. When you were a child and your mother said to you, you need to give that back. What does that mean you did? You took something that didn't belong to you and you now need to make up for it by giving back. So my question to you, people who say to business people, you need to give back to society, is that what they think? Do they think that if you're successful in business, you must have done something somewhere along the way that was bad, that was immoral, and you need to atone for it as if it's a sin? Well, you can decide what the Mexican culture is about that. I'll leave that to you, but I will certainly tell you about the American culture. The American view is, yes, that's exactly what people think. People think if you're successful in business, you must have done something wrong somewhere along the way. The only way to become successful is by having not been a very good person somewhere along the way, and you need to give back to atone for it. That's why they say you need to give back. So here's my suggestion, and this is the first thing I would like to for you to think about. My first argument. If it's the case, let's suppose that you and I together, we look at all of the arguments in favor of business or in favor of a market economy and the role business might play in it. And we also look at all of the objections and worries and concerns people have about business and market. Suppose we look at all of them. And after that entire investigation, let's suppose we all come to the conclusion that, yes, business is the sort of thing that in order to be successful, you have to do something morally wrong. There's no way to be successful in business unless you do something morally objectionable. Let's suppose we come to that conclusion. Okay? Here's my suggestion. If that's the conclusion we come to, then we shouldn't tell business people to give back to society. We should tell them something else. What should we tell them?
Well, wait.
That's pretty close to what I was going to suggest. What I would say is we should tell them, don't go into business in the first place. Don't be a business person. I mean, think about other things. We don't say to a thief, well, it's fine to keep stealing as long as some of what you steal you give to charity. We say, don't be a thief. Same thing with business. If business is inherently immoral, then I think we should not tell people to engage in business, and we certainly shouldn't have schools that train people in how to be effective thieves, if that's what they really are. So, for business professors, people who are going to teach business, for universities that are going to have classes in business, for places that are going to have schools of business, I think it's incumbent on us to figure out a way for business to be valuable in itself. There must be some way. It's incumbent on us to understand, to develop some understanding of business such that it doesn't require atonement or making up for it, but rather it has value in the very activity of business itself. If we can't do that, then I think we should just close up shop. We should stop doing what we're doing. So I think that means we need to, that's the responsibility we have, is to come up with some kind of understanding of business such that it can be valuable in itself. And that's what I'd like to try to sketch for you today. Okay. Okay. So why would we go into business? Now, I mentioned that I'm a philosopher by training, and those philosophers among you will forgive me for just a couple minutes of philosophy. Don't worry, it won't be too painful, I promise. So I draw on Aristotle, at least this part of Aristotle. Aristotle argued that human beings, perhaps alone among all creatures on earth, have a hierarchy of ends. They have a hierarchy of goals. What that means is that there are things that they are doing today that are in the service of longer-term goals, that themselves are in the service of some ultimate or final goal. And then if you want to have a rationally ordered moral life, you have to have an understanding of what your final goal, your ultimate last goal in life is. And then you reverse engineer. So here's the thought experiment for you. Imagine yourself at the end of your life. So right now, think about yourself at the end of your life. Suppose you're 120 years old. You're looking back on the life you led. What kind of a life do you want to have led such that you yourself would honestly say that was a life worth having been led? Once you think about what that life would be for you, then you reverse engineer. What do I need to be doing 20 years from now to enable that to happen? 10 years from now, 1 year from now, today. So a rationally ordered moral life is one in which all your activities increase the chances of achieving that favorable end of life judgment. Now, what is that ultimate end? The ultimate end, according to Aristotle, was this word eudaimonia. I don't know if you can all see it all the way over there on that side of the board. Eudaimonia, that's just a transliteration of the Greek word. It's often translated in English as happiness. I think a better translation would be something like flourishing. It's the cognizance of a life well and fully lived, where you use all of your abilities and all the opportunities available to you in the service of goals that you think are important, are worthwhile. So in order to achieve that, we need what I just described as the rationally ordered moral life, which means you have to connect the things you do on a day-to-day basis with that ultimate end. You have to be able to see how the things you're doing today, and tomorrow, and next week, what you're doing here at Ibero, how that connects with the vision that you have for the right kind of life for you. All right, so let's relate that now to business. So that's the Aristotelian view, a sketch of the Aristotelian view. Let's connect that now to business. I'm going to tell you what I think is the proper context of business in just 5 steps. Here's the first step. I think so. There are only 5 steps. I think the first 2 are not controversial, but we'll start getting controversial with number 3. So just hold on. So the first step, we want a just and humane society. So a society whose institutions reflect justice and that treats all of its members humanely. Now, I think that's true regardless of where anybody is on the political or economic spectrum. I think at a certain level of generality, all of us want that, or all of us at least could endorse that. I think, does anybody want to dispute that? Yeah. Okay. We want a just and humane society. Step number 2, a just and humane society depends on a variety of institutions. These are different kinds of institutions. Political institutions, economic institutions, maybe moral or cultural or religious institutions. There are various kinds of institutions that are required to uphold a just and humane society. In other words, we won't have a just and humane society without the right kinds of institutions. Okay? So good so far? All right, now is where I think we might get a little more controversial. Among those institutions is a properly functioning market economy. Now note, I don't say it's the only institution. I say it's just one of them. There are many other important ones as well. And in fact, I'll just, for disclosure about from my own perspective, I think religious institutions are also extremely important. But please take a look at that sentence for a second. A properly functioning market economy. Those philosophers in the room, which word is the word that's doing a lot of work that you want to hear more about? Which is the word in that sentence that is doing a lot of the philosophical work that you're going to want to hear more about? Properly. Yes. What's a properly functioning market economy? Right. Very good. Well, properly functioning market economy is based on honorable business. Okay. Now we're almost to number 5. What's the word you want to know about now?
What is honorable?
What is honorable? Exactly. Here's my suggestion. Honorable business is when industries, firms, individuals, you, those of you who are going to go into business or work with business, are dedicated to creating genuine value. And what I mean by that is making your own lives better only if at the same time you're making other people's lives better as well. Okay? My suggestion is that businesses and firms and business people who are creating value in this way are contributing to exactly this hierarchy of purpose. So my goal, listen, I'm just speaking for myself, not my institution, but the University of Notre Dame, but speaking for myself, I would consider it a very great victory if our graduates of the business school, wherever they go to work, suppose they go to work for Google, or they go to work for Amazon, or they go to work for one of the big accounting firms, wherever they go to work. If someone says, well, what are you going to be doing for work there? I want them to say, I'm contributing to a just and humane society. And if someone says, what on earth do you mean by that? They say, oh, well, give me 2 minutes and I'll explain it to you. I'm going to be creating value for myself only if I'm creating value for other people, which is what honorable business is, which is part of a properly functioning market economy. That's one of the institutions that upholds a just and humane society. So that's the hierarchy of virtue in business that I want to suggest. And now I'll ask you this question. If you've been following all of this along, if you dedicate yourself to this, by the way, if you decide that you would like to be an honorable business person, or you think there is such a thing as honorable business, what does that also mean? There's such a thing as what? Dishonorable business. Is there such a thing as dishonorable business? Yes, there is. So that means we have to distinguish between the two and dedicate ourselves to the one and never to the other. But if you decide to do that, then there's going to be only one way to improve your life in business. There's only one way that you can improve your own life, raise the situation of yourself or your family or your community. There's only one way to do it, and that's by, oh, you can't see it, improving other people's lives as well. Okay? So you can improve your life only by improving the lives of others. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, so I teach in a business school. Students inevitably ask me, is this going to be on the test? Why does any of this matter? Why do we need to know this? I have finance students and accounting students and marketing students, and they say, why do we need to learn anything about philosophy? What relevance does that have to anything we're doing? Well, here's something that might give you an idea. Perhaps you've heard of something called the Great Enrichment. Take a look at that. Perhaps you've seen a graph like that before. If you haven't, let me tell you what you're looking at. This is the total amount of wealth created in the world, all of it added together, every year since year one to today in constant international dollars. In other words, discounting, this is real inflation adjusted wealth, the total amount of wealth created in the world. That is quite a hockey stick, isn't it? Have you seen that graph before, or are you aware of that graph? So going all the way back to year one, the time of Jesus, not a lot of wealth. 500, the Roman Empire is falling, no wealth. Year 1000, Song Dynasty in China at its apex, nothing. 1500, right before Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the Wittenberg church doors, nothing. And then something begins to happen, and all of a sudden, you and I are lucky enough, are blessed enough to be living in a time when there's more wealth in the world than there has ever been in the history of humanity. And it's not close. It's not just a marginal change. It's a substantial, spectacular change. Well, that raises an interesting question, doesn't it? What happened? Something happened. All right, I want you to think about that for a second. I'm going to show you one more graph. This is going back a little further. This is going back to 12,000 years ago. So 10,000 BC, 12,000 years ago. Now I've slightly adjusted the numbers here. So what I'm giving you now is per capita wealth. What that means is the total amount of wealth created by human beings divided by the number of human beings alive on the planet each year. Okay. Now you'll note that there are two different lines. There's the blue line and a red line. The blue line was calculated by Angus Madison, who died a few years ago. He should have won the Nobel Prize before he died for being able to figure out how to actually calculate all of this worldwide wealth all the way per capita, all the way back to year one. Brad DeLong is an economist at Berkeley, that's the University of California in Berkeley. So he calculates it all the way back to 12,000 years ago. There's a slight difference between the lines owing to slightly different ways of calculating. I would suggest that the different ways of calculating is less interesting than the consistency among those lines. They're very consistent. So once again, we have a whole lot of almost nothing, and then something happens. Okay. Now, big question is, what happened? Now, before you have, I know you might have a theory, and by the way, if you figure this out, you might win the Nobel Prize, so give it more than 90 seconds. There are, and I do want to be open about this, there are different schools of thought about this, so there's no consensus about why this happened. There is consensus that it happened. So the fact that this took place, yes, we agree on that. But why it happened, when it did, where it did, as opposed to somewhere other time or some other place, there are different schools of thought about that, and there's quite a bit of discussion, especially over the last 40 or 50 years. There's been an enormous amount of discussion and investigation of this. But there are a couple of things that we can rule out. In other words, things that we are pretty sure did not account for this change. One of them is human biology. Think about human biology. Is 12,000 years enough time for human beings, Homo sapiens, to be biologically distinct? No, it's not anywhere near enough time. If you took a child from 12,000 years ago and transported that child to Mexico City, Ibero, in 2023, what would that child be doing? Playing Far Cry 4, or like everybody else, whatever video games that people play, they'd be doing the same thing, totally indistinguishable. There'd be no way to distinguish. So it's not biology that changed. It's not human psychology that changed, insofar as that's connected to human biology. Did climate change? Has the climate changed? Well, you may know that 12,000 years ago was just as the world was coming out of its last ice age, one of the larger ice ages. So did global temperatures increase or decrease during this time? They did, slightly, not a lot, but they went up, they went down, they went up, they went down. Made no difference. So those things don't seem to be what explains it. So now what does explain it? Here, this is just looking at the last 500 years. I gave you a couple of different countries. It's the same, similar data, all again in constant international dollars, so discounting for differences in currency. There you see Western offshoots, United States, Canada, etc. Sub-Saharan Africa is near the bottom. Here's Mexico, Western Europe. Note when things began to change. Not a lot of change in 1500, 1600, 1700, 1800. Some things begin to change, and then things really begin to take off. Okay. This is just so that you have an appreciation for just how big it is. You may remember Thomas Hobbes, the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan and said, "The life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." Well, before about 1800 or so, he was right. That was true for almost all people anywhere on earth. Didn't matter what country you were in. Average person in 1800 was no better off than the average human being in 100,000 BC, as far as we can tell. What does that mean? That long, low red line I was showing you, that's living at between 1 and 3 contemporary United States dollars per person per day. So you think about that. Could you live on, let's say, $3 a day? For everything, food, clothing, shelter, travel, phone, everything? Well, maybe, but you'd probably have to give up a lot. But that was the norm for humanity for almost all of its existence, indeed more than 99.9% of its existence. What is it today? These are the numbers today. Maybe you know this. Mexico, it's $45 per person per day, again in constant dollars. World average is $48. United States, $164. So what do we have? We have quite a substantial increase, 15 times. So what does that mean? In Mexico, the average person alive in 2023 in Mexico is 15 times wealthier than the average person alive in Mexico in 1800. By the way, that's not 15% higher. That's 15 times higher. You understand? Yeah, that's a huge difference. That's not a marginal difference. And 55 times wealthier in the United States. So now my question that you can't read there, and I apologize for that, it says, what caused this change? Here's my answer. So I mentioned that there are people on different sides of this, so I'll just give you what my answer is. And I'm drawing on the work of a number of other economic historians, including Deirdre McCloskey. Maybe some of you have heard of Deirdre McCloskey. It wasn't a shift in institutions. It wasn't a change in human biology. It wasn't a change in climate. It was a shift in morality. That's what changed. Here's my suggestion. So suppose I say to you, what's your name?
Alejandro.
Alejandro. So Alejandro has a very nice iPhone here. Now, suppose I want to get that iPhone. There are two ways I could get that from him, aren't there? What are the two ways I could get Alejandro's iPhone?
You can steal it or you can buy it.
Okay, so I would like the chairman of the philosophy department to note for the record that the first thing mentioned was you could steal it. Okay, let's switch that for a second. So one way I could get it from is steal. I could steal it when you're not looking. I could kill you and take it. I could also defraud you out of it. I could say I'll give you $1 million or something, and you believe me for some reason, and then you give me the phone, and I just leave and I head off back to the United States. Any of those ways, that's one way. We might call all of those extraction. Think about the nature of that transaction, as it were. If I steal a phone from him, who benefits from that transaction? I do, right? Plus one iPhone for me, minus one iPhone for Alejandro, plus one plus minus one equals zero. That we call a zero-sum transaction. That's no increase in overall benefit. That's just moving something from one place to another. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you remember the long, low red line I showed you? That's the explanation for why there was never any real wealth created. So when the pharaohs were building their pyramids, took a lot of capital, a lot of wealth to build those pyramids. How did they get it? Theft, slavery, imperialism, colonialism, yeah. All of those ways are extraction. They're benefiting themselves at the expense of others. Think about every great civilization in the past. What do human beings do? What has been the story of humanity? As soon as one person or one group gets enough power over another person or group, what have we, to our shame, done? We conquer them, we enslave them, we kill them, we steal their lands, we take whatever property they have. Yes, but when we do all of that, there's no overall increase in wealth. It just stays exactly at the low rate it was. It just moves it from one place to another. Okay, so what was the other way? What was the other way I could get on this one? Oh, borrow. But what if I want to have it for my son?
Buy it.
Yeah, so I could make Alejandro an offer, right? I could offer him something that he is free to accept or decline. So suppose I do that, I offer you some amount of money and you agree, and I give you the money and you give me the phone. So suppose we do that. Let's say it was voluntary, mutually. I didn't force him. He didn't force me. We agreed. Who benefits from that transaction?
Well,
we both do, don't we?
Well, you can sell the iPhone again.
Yes, and if I do, and if it's voluntary, then who would benefit from that transaction?
you.
I and the other party would benefit from that transaction as well. And that happens all the time. So think about used car market. So lots of things can be bought and sold many times. Houses can be bought and sold many times. As long as there's no extraction going on, meaning no fraud or theft or forcing of anybody, if it's mutually voluntary, then each of those transactions should be mutually beneficial. Otherwise, how do we know that, by the way? If Alejandro didn't think however much money I offered him was enough for the phone, what would he have said? He would have said, no, thank you, and gone somewhere else, right? And if I didn't think that the phone was worth the price that you offered me, I would have said, no, thank you, and gone somewhere else. So the fact that we both voluntarily agreed means that each of us, from his or her own perspective, believes we benefited from that transaction. So it's positive value for Alejandro, positive value for me. Positive plus positive is, what is that? It's a positive sum transaction. It's what we call a positive sum transaction. So these are the two ways. I would call that second one cooperation. So the first one is extraction, where one party benefits itself at the expense of the other party. The second one is cooperation, where both parties benefit themselves only by benefiting the others. So both parties benefit. Now, what caused the big change? Here's my suggestion. People began to change their moral attitudes. People began to think that maybe extraction was morally wrong. Maybe cooperation was a morally superior way to deal with other people. Not everybody thought that. Only some people in some places, and it was at first it was only extended to people just like them and maybe not like everybody else. But that idea began to spread. And as it began to spread, what did that enable? More and more positive sum transactions. And as more and more positive sum transactions were enabled, then like the miracle of compounding interest, who are my business students? Do you know what the miracle of compounding interest is? You will, or you should. The miracle of compounding interest. If you start saving for your retirement as a young person, you put a little bit of money away every month, let's say when you're young. At first, it doesn't really do anything. And then it begins to go like that. Because the interest is compounding on the interest. It's the miracle of compounding interest. That begins to look like that line that I showed. That's what I'm suggesting began to happen. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I have an in-class quiz for you. Ready for an in-class quiz? I want to ask you two questions. Between extraction and cooperation, which of those is more moral?
Cooperation.
Yeah, that was supposed to be easy. Can we all say that together? Which of those is more moral? Okay, cooperation, thank you, yes. Does anybody want to dispute that? Okay. Now let me ask you my second question. Which one leads to increasing overall prosperity? By a spectacular stroke of good luck, it's the same one. So then my suggestion is that honorable business, you can't quite read this. Honorable business is cooperative business. Plus just a bit more. Okay, so let me tell you what I mean. What's honorable business? So to be an honorable business person, the first thing you have to do is to make a personal commitment to no extractive exchanges whatsoever. Not even when you could get away with it, not even when nobody's looking. You do it as a matter of the force of your own character. You are the sort of person who would never benefit yourself at the expense of some other unwilling person. But what follows from that? Cooperative behavior only. So in other words, behavior in which all sides show respect for their autonomy and dignity. Did you know the word dignity? So that's a new word, I haven't used that yet, dignity. But I think when you make somebody an offer, and allow that person to say yes or no. And if that person says no, you respect it. Even if I think Alejandro's making a mistake. Even if I think Alejandro will come to regret it in the future. If he says no, you respect it, and that is a way of respecting another person's dignity as being equal to yours. I call that the opt-out option. You recognize everyone's right to say no thank you to any offer, any proposal that anybody would make to them. That's a way of respecting their dignity. And then the little bit more I said that honorable business is, so cooperative business plus a little bit more, making a personal commitment to actually doing more than just not taking from people. So the first step is don't take from people. Yes?
Well, based on your experience, do you consider, if business can be moral?
Yes?
Because I mean, I know that there are other companies or business that are looking to create a good community, but there is always an intention.
Always an intention? Yes.
So
this would be my suggestion about what the intention should be. The intention should be, we want to use whatever abilities we have, whatever our technical knowledge that we have is, whatever resources we have to benefit ourselves only by benefiting others. And even if we could benefit ourselves by doing things that we don't really think would benefit others, maybe it's legal, that doesn't mean it's moral. So if I'm right about this, my suggestion is by calling this a personal commitment, what that means is that there are plenty of things that are legal that people shouldn't do. Isn't that true? Yes. So law is not an imperfect indicator of what morality is. So my suggestion is that the honorable business person often says no to opportunities. No, that is not what we should be selling. No, that is not how we should be selling it. No, that is not how we should be engaging with our employees or our suppliers or the people who are providing logistics for us, etc. We often have to say no, unless you can yourself make sure that you're creating genuine value in your business for others as well. Okay. Now, before I conclude, and I'm happy to take some questions afterwards as well, but I want to address one potential objection with a little bit of a thought. Do I have time for just one objection? So if you had an economy in which people were engaging in what I'm calling honorable business, suppose you had some version of what I'm calling properly functioning market economy, would there be inequality in that economy? Yes, there would. along different kinds of margins. There certainly would be. So here's a philosophical question for you. Is that something to worry about? Okay, now before you answer, I want you to think about this. Suppose I'm going to give you a thought experiment. Suppose we have two people, A and B. I'm not going to tell you who they are, not yet, I will in a second. And I'm not going to tell you anything else about them except that A is wealthier. And let's raise it quite high. Let's say that A has 100 times as much wealth as B. Okay? Now, without knowing anything else about them, I want you to reflect on whether you think that a society in which one person could be worth 100 times as much as another person must necessarily be an unjust society. Is it a failure of justice, maybe a failure of social justice, if you like, if you prefer that term? Is there no way for that? And whatever I see some people doing this, and other people doing this, okay? Whatever your view about that is, I want to suggest that that might have something to do with the direction of the system of political economy you might endorse. So your answer to that question might indicate what system of political economy you might endorse. But if we have a society in which one person is worth 100 times as much as another person, must that mean that there is something unjust about that society? Especially if I mentioned that my university is a Catholic university, I know it was also a Catholic university. We talk about human dignity a lot. We talk about all human beings being born in the image, being created in the image and likeness of God. Maybe you've heard that phrase before, the image and likeness of God. So maybe we're all equally children of God. Okay, if we're all equally children of God, how is it possible that one person could have 100 times as much wealth as another person? Okay, while you're thinking about your answer to that question, I'm going to tell you who my A and B are. Here is A. I say that? There. You recognize who that is? Who's that? Elon Musk. So I looked it up today. As of market close yesterday, Elon Musk is worth 186 billion US dollars. 186 billion dollars. Apparently, yesterday he lost $600 million. I guess what's a few hundred million among friends? Okay, so who is somebody who is worth only 1/100th as much as Elon Musk? Well, there are many people we could pick. Here's somebody I picked who's a former neighbor of mine. Recognize him? Who is that? Michael Jordan. Okay, he wasn't actually a neighbor of mine. I was joking about that. I used to teach in North Carolina, one of the states in the United States. He also had a house in North Carolina, so I claim. So the greatest basketball player of all time. Please don't tell me LeBron James. Michael Jordan, as of market close yesterday, was worth $2 billion. So he's 193rd as wealthy as Elon Musk. Now, my daughter tells me that nobody knows who Michael Jordan is anymore, and I'm dating myself by talking about Michael Jordan. So she insisted that I include this person on the list. Tell me if you recognize this person. You recognize who that is? Okay, everybody knows who that is. Yeah. Who is, what's her name? Kim Kardashian. I don't really know what Kim Kardashian does exactly, but she is worth, as of yesterday, she's worth $1.2 billion. That's a lot of money. I'm not sure I really want to know what she does to earn that, but she's worth, that makes her 155th of Elon Musk's worth. Okay, now while you're thinking about this, what's the point that this example is supposed to make? These are obviously extreme examples. These are people who are way out on the tail end of the wealth world. But what I think that this example suggests is that these are two important questions when we're thinking about equality or inequality. First of all, how did the wealthier person get it? Did the wealthier person get it through extraction, through force, fraud, theft, special government privileges, special government subsidies, etc., that actually come at the expense of others? Or did it come through cooperative, mutually voluntary, and mutually beneficial transactions? I think the answer to that question makes a big moral difference when we're evaluating somebody as well. And then, of course, there is also the second question, which is the absolute quality of the poorer person's life. In other words, regardless of how wealthy somebody is in relation to them, what's the actual quality of life? Michael Jordan and Kim Kardashian are extremely poor relative to Elon Musk, but by world or historical standards, they are probably doing just fine. So the idea that we should redistribute some of Elon Musk's wealth to them seems ridiculous. But then what about people who aren't as wealthy as them? So in the United States, so I said 100 times as much. In the United States, are there people who are worth 1,000 times as much as others? Yes. How about 10,000 times as much as others? Yes. Can we raise it another order of magnitude, 100,000 times? Are there people in the United States who are worth 100,000 times as much as others in the United States? Yes. Can we double it to 200,000? How far can we go? How about 400,000? Are there people in the United States who are worth only 1/400,000 as much as Elon Musk? The answer is yes. Now, what about the absolute quality of those people's lives? So think about somebody who has only 1/400,000 of Elon Musk's life. How poor or miserable is that person's life? Well, who is that person? That's me. And actually, I rounded up to make myself feel better. Now, why raise this? Here's the philosophical question. And this is something I think economics cannot answer for you. So this is a genuine philosophical question that I invite you to think about. If you could get rid of one thing in the world, one thing only, would you get rid of poverty or inequality? If you could get rid of one but not the other, would you get rid of poverty or inequality? No. Okay. I will leave that to you to think about. But I will suggest that's not merely an abstract academic question. That seems to be the actual situation we find ourselves in. You remember that long, low red line I showed you? Yeah. So it's only in extremely recent human history that we have finally figured out how to enable anybody to rise out of that very low level of poverty. But as they have begun to do that, remember the graph I showed you with the different countries and the regions of the world? Substantially all areas of the world are getting wealthier, but not at the same rate. Some are getting much wealthier than others. On the other hand, we do have a pretty good idea about how to keep people relatively equal in wealth. But historically speaking, when people are equal in wealth, they are equally what? Poor. So that really does seem to be the issue. Either we can have equality but relative poverty, or we can have relative prosperity, wealth, but inequality. We have not figured out a way to get any third option. This seems to be our only option. All right, so let me conclude now, ladies and gentlemen. Let's come to my conclusion. My answer to this question of why business, why should you engage in business if you were thinking about becoming a business person? And by the way, even if you don't go into business, you will deal with business. Everybody deals with business in one way or another. Either you're working in a business, you're starting a business, you're buying from a business. How many of you have bought things from Amazon? Is there anybody who has not bought anything from Amazon? Okay, so every choice you make is also both an economic and a moral choice. Why would you engage in business? Because honorable business, as I've described it, is cooperative. It can treat people with dignity. But also because, as I described it again, it seeks to create mutual benefit. What it also does is it leads to increasing overall prosperity, although not at the same rate. So not all of us get wealthy to the same degree or at the same rate, but we all get wealthier. Substantially, all of us get wealthier. So why should you engage in business? Here's what I would suggest. To use your time, your limited and scarce time, your talent, your considerable talent, which you are developing here at Ibero, and your treasure, to benefit yourself, but only if you benefit others at the same time, simultaneously benefit others. In that way, I think honorable business could lead to both prosperity and morality, because that's a morally superior way to treat people rather than just extracting from them. And so understood, perhaps honorable business could even be a moral calling. All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
There. Thank you very much, everyone.